Welcome to the next video in the Wheels 3.0 tutorial series. Today, we'll look at creating a basic CRUD interface using the Wheels CLI. If you don't have the Wheels CLI installed, check out our previous video on how to set up your development environment. To get started, we'll use the Wheels New command, which starts a wizard that will walk us through the process of creating a new Wheels project. First, we need to enter a name for our application. I'm just going to use my app as the application name. When asked to select which version of Wheels to install, we'll select the second option for Wheels 3.0. We'll clear out the reload password, which is fine for development, but you'll definitely want to set a reload password before deploying to production. The next prompt is for the data source name to use. It will default to the name we gave to the application earlier, which is fine for us. Next, we are prompted to select the CFML engine we wish to deploy, and we'll select the default, which is the latest version of Lucy. And since we selected to use the Lucy engine, the wizard asks us if we want to use the built-in H2 database. This is a file-based database that is perfect for development without needing to set up a separate database server. We'll select Yes, which will set up the database and the data source in our application. Next, we are asked if we want to include the Bootstrap CSS framework, which will generate nicer-looking screens for us. Lastly, we are asked if we want to create a box.json file that is needed if you intend to upload the project to forgebox.io. You can decide if this is valuable for you. I'm going to select No for this project. Finally, we get a confirmation screen where we'll say yes and start the installation process. The wizard will initially download the 3.0 template we specified. Then we'll move on to downloading the dependencies for our application, and finally configuring the H2 database in Bootstrap and starting the server. Now that the installation is completed, let's go and have a look to see what actually got installed. So you can see the CLI has set up a default Wheels installation skeleton. It's altered a few configuration files with some of our preferences from when we ran the installation wizard, and it's also created files like a URL rewrite file, which is for use in command box, and it's also added a server.json file, which is what was used to start the application. The congratulations screen shows us that everything was installed properly. We can click on the Info tab to see that the application name and data source name made it into the configuration. We can also see that the database driver for H2 has been installed and the data source is ready for use. So now we can actually get on with creating users via the CLI. Back in command box, we're going to run the following command, Wheels scaffold, and we need to enter a name for the object, which is going to be user. We're going to skip the database migration for now. I'm just going to select no. So what that's done is created some skeleton view files, a model file, and a controller. Let's have a quick look at all this. Under App Controllers, we now have a users.cfc controller, which will contain all our business logic for creating and updating users. Under App Models, we've got a user.cfc file, and under App Views, we've got a new users folder with various bits and pieces in it. So even though we've got a basic user model now, we don't actually have any properties on it, so let's add some. We can do that via the command line. So back in the CLI, we're going to do Wheels G, which is short for generate. Then we say property, because we want to create a property. We want to do it on the user model, and the property name is going to be first name, and press enter. So what that has done is created a new database migration file, which we'll come to in a bit, and it's also inserted a text field helper into our form partial so that we can actually add and edit data. And it's also inserted a placeholder into the actual index listing. Finally, it's added an output of this field into the show.cfm file, view file. So we're not going to migrate the database just yet because we're going to do that in a moment. But we're going to add a couple more properties just to fill out our user model a bit. Let's create a last name property, once again skipping the database migration. Lastly, we'll create an email property this time. So before we actually run the database migrations, what we should do is have a look at the migration files which were created, because we're going to consolidate those a little bit. Back in our application in the App Migrator Migrations folder, there are 4 generated CFC files. We want to consolidate these down to a single file. The CFCs in the Wheels migration system have 2 functions. One is called up and one is called down. Anything you do in up, you need to undo in down. So if we look at this CFC, for example, we've got a create table call in our up function, and in our down function, we've got a drop table call. While we could technically run the database migrations now, we're actually going to remove the latter 3 files and put everything in this create table call. So let's delete these 3 and concentrate on this file. If you look at the top of any migration file, you'll see a handy reference of all the various functions you can call. For our columns, I'm just going to add some string-based columns. I'm going to use a single t.string call, but add both first name and last name column names. We're going to set null to be false, and we'll put a limit of 50 for these. Next, we'll use the t.string call again and add the email address this time, setting the limit to 255. Okay, so there's our 3 column calls. We are done modifying the migration file, so we can save it now. There are 2 ways of running migrations. One is via the CLI itself, and the other is via the user interface in our app. We're going to use the user interface, so let's return to the Congratulations page. We can click on the Migrator tab, which gives us the Migrator user interface. We can use the Templating tab to create migration file templates manually, like we did through the CLI. Then we can use our code editor to fill in the migration files and complete them. On the Migrations tab, however, we see all our migration files listed. We can tell which migrations have already run and which still need to be run. We can run the migrations sequentially one at a time, or use the Migrate to Latest and Reset Database buttons to migrate all migration files or reset all migration files. Click on the button to migrate to the latest. You'll be presented with the results of the migration attempt. Since the model configurations are read at application startup and cached, we will need to reload the application to get the framework to introspect the users table and update the model configuration. In order to do that, we'll go back to the Info tab and click on Reload to reload the application. Now that the application has been reloaded, we are ready to visit our CRUD pages and interact with the database. Let's go to the address bar and type /users to get to the user index page. Now we can create a couple of new user by clicking on the Create New User button. Let's create a user for Tom and Jerry. We'll click on the Create New User button and enter Tom for the first name and Cat for the last name. Then we'll enter tom@acme.com for the email and save the record. Now let's create a record for Jerry. Let's start by clicking on the Create New User button again. This time we'll enter Jerry for the first name and Mouse for the last name. We'll enter jerry@acme.com for the email address and save the record again. We can click on the View buttons to view a record or click on the Edit button to get back to our form and update a record. Clicking on a Delete button will delete the user. Before we go, let's wire up our application so our user index page is the default page that the application will serve if we don't provide a controller and action on the URL line. Currently, the application is set up to serve the Congratulations page as the default for our application. To accomplish this, we'll have to go to the app directory and then go into the config directory and then open up the routes.cfm page. In this file, we see the routes for the user's resource that we added via the CLI. We also see the definition for the root route. By convention, it will default to the Congratulations page, but we can specify a route we wish to go to. We'll change the route line to go to user's index route and save the file. Now we need to reload our application for the change to the root route to take effect. We've already seen how to do this by going to the Info tab. This time, we'll use the reload link in the debug panel at the bottom of the page. Once the application reloads, we can go to the browser address bar and go to the default /root. This time, we see that the application loaded the user's index page as the default page for our app. That concludes our tutorial on creating a CRUD interface in Wheels 3.0 using the CLI. In this video, we created a Wheels 3.0 application, set up a H2 database to use with our application. Using scaffolding, we created a user model, added some properties to the model, Then we consolidated our migration files and ran the migrations to update our database. We then looked at the user interface of the application and used it to create a couple of records. Finally, we wired up our application to show the new user's index page as the default for our application. Check out the description below for links to connect with the Wheels community. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification icon to receive notifications as we release more videos in this series. Until next time, happy coding.